I'm Vinod Sharma, Senior Professor Disaster Management, and today we will discuss one very important topic, that is the national policy for disaster management. In fact, as I discussed earlier, that we had the Disaster Management Act in 2005. After that, the National Disaster Management Authority was formed, which was headed by Honorable Prime Minister. The members were nominated, and then in 2009 there was another important document formed, that is the National Disaster Management Policy. And this policy is having, because policy is basically government intention, this is the government statement and that what they want, and the policy is having vision, mission of the country. And vision is very clearly given in the policy, that they want disaster resilient India, that the resilience will be the focus. And the first chapter, which is initial, after giving the disaster management cycle, etc., I think the most important thing which policy is given, the strengthening of Disaster Management Act, institutional structures, that the NDMA at state level, State Disaster Management Authority, then there is District Disaster Management Authority, and I'm sorry, but there was one thing was missing, which was the community level involvement and community level planning or village level planning. So that was not given. Participation of people is mentioned in the policy, but when we say institutional structures, then panchayats should also have a role in disaster risk reduction, and maybe when it is revised, this will be considered. The actually act is very detailed, and policy is very, briefly saying almost the same thing, and just clarifying, how there will be mechanism of different institutions, how different committees will be formed, because at national level there is a national executive committee, which is headed by Honorable Home Secretary. Similarly, every state is having a state executive committee, which will be headed by Honorable Chief Secretary of the state. And then there is a National Crisis Management Committee, which is headed by the Cabinet Secretary, and there are some important secretaries in this. There is High Level Committee, which is formed when there is any big disaster, and the center will have to assess that how much is the damage. So all these things are mentioned, in the act, and policy is saying that what is their role and how they should work, So this is one very important thing which is given. Then I think each and every aspect of disaster management start with the preparedness, and the government focus is, because as I told you that there is a paradigm shift, so this shift is from relief towards preparedness and mitigation. So how this preparedness will be there? How this preparedness will focus more on strengthening our warning system? How preparedness will be more on having a very strong capacity building component? How it will be there when we use ICT, IT, and in fact today, if I say that there is a role of artificial intelligence, we are using drone and all these things, so which was not part of the policy, but today when it will be revised, definitely there is a role of this artificial intelligence and science and technology. So I think, but the role of science and technology is very much there in the policy, and they are saying that in risk reduction we should use science and technology, and there should be proper strengthening of the institutions like Indian Meteorological Department, like Central Water Commission, like groundwater board, like you know. So all these institutions which are playing important role in disaster management, they should be strengthened, and science and technology should be promoted. Then there is response part, and response is visible basically, and that's why each and every country normally focus on response, that it should be visible. And India, I think we are one step ahead than others, because we have a specialized force which is called as NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, which is having 12 battalions today. And initially it was thought that only 4 battalions will be there, but later on 8 battalions, then 12 battalions. And all these battalions are trained for different disasters, different hazards. They are trained in water rescue, they are trained in earthquake, search and rescue. So different training is given to the NDRF, and they are there. Then the policies discussing the reconstruction and rehabilitation, which is a very costly subject, and which is people will never be satisfied. You do whatever you want to do, but this is one subject where you cannot satisfy people. But policy is saying that whenever you do reconstruction, it should be, because 2009 there was no Sindai framework, but they still mentioned that it should be a disaster resilient structure, and we should focus on resilient infrastructure, etc. So I think reconstruction, rehabilitation, this is very important issue, and it is given. Then there is a mention of very important aspect, that is the relief mechanism. And relief policy is saying that there should be minimum standard of relief. This is one. And it is not a charity basically, it is their right. And relief with dignity. I think this is very important, which is mentioned in the policy. And that's why all the authorities which are involved in this process, they should consider that relief is their right basically. If the people are affected, we will have to provide them. And there was no mention basically of recovery and all that, but today, in case it is revised, and definitely I think 2020, now it is more than 10 years, there is a time when the policy should be revised, and certainly there will be more focus on recovery, because the whole world is thinking that recovery is equally important. Of course, build back better and all these mechanisms should be there, and it is already there in the policy. So the policy is very well laid, but some of the things in present context, they are not there. So we will discuss that also. There will be a discussion, comparison, on other policies of the other countries, I mean. That now many countries, they have their disaster management policy. After 2009, when India came with the policy, many countries, developed, they gave their policy. So we will discuss where we stand and what are our strong points. Last but not the least, the most critical point from my point of view is that how this policy is linked with other policies, because disaster management is not a separate subject. How it is linked with the water policy of the country, how it is, when we say capacity building, yes, capacity building is part of this policy, but how it is linked with the our national policy for training, which came in 2013. How it is related with science and technology innovation policy, which came in 2013. So I think the most important thing is that the relationship of this policy with other policies, and how it is linked with others, and how in comparison to other policies, how you rate the national disaster management policy. And the last point will be the implementation. We have very good policies in the country, but most of the time we face problem in implementation. And if you will see the reason is that the policies are not practical. In fact, the National Disaster Management Policy, I was also part of it, and what we did is we did several workshops throughout the countries. We consulted non-governmental organizations, we consulted academia, we consulted bureaucracy, and then finally we came out to this document so that it is acceptable to all. They own this policy, and then the implementation will be easy. So this was the, I should say, aim, and that's how the policy was evolved. But definitely more than 10 years now, so it needs some modifications, revisions, and I think it will be done in due course of time. Thank you.